everybody and welcome along to a brand new video where today I'm going to be continuing a series that I started a very long time ago. Back in the back end of 2017, when the Moffat era was coming to an end, I decided to sort of look back at each of the series that Stephen Moffat wrote and looking at sort of what worked, what didn't, looking at the various episodes through the series and just giving an overall sort of review / retrospective view on those particular series. And it had always been my intention since then to get round to doing it for the RTD era, the first 4.5 series of New Who, and the time has finally come to tackle that, I think. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about Series 1, the 2005 series featuring Christopher Eccleston that brought back Doctor Who as a show after having been off the air for the best part of 16 years apart from the Doctor Who movie. So Series 1 was a pretty massive thing at the time. I don't remember anything about the hype of it at the time. I remember watching it at the time. I definitely did from the middle of Rose onwards, from around the time when the Doctor gives his speech about the Earth turning and things like that. I remember I came and my mum was watching it, I think, at about that point into the episode, and from there onwards I was completely hooked and watched the whole of the rest of Series 1. I am pretty confident. I can't remember watching every episode because I was only 7 years old at the time, but it definitely, I'm pretty sure, watched the rest of that series and from there became a massive fan of Doctor Who. So it's an important series to me, and it was probably arguably the most important series for the show in terms of re-establishing it as a franchise in the 21st century back to a mainstream audience again after Doctor Who in sort of at the end of the 80s as it was petering out in the classic series and through the Wilderness years became very much a sort of cult sci-fi series that was considered extremely nerdy and that it was almost weird if you had an interest in the show, I think it's fair to say. But then suddenly 2005 happened, Series 1 happened, and suddenly 10 million people were watching it. It was mainstream popular, everybody was talking about it like it was suddenly a massive cultural programme again, a cultural event. It became event TV under the Russell T Davies era, and that was all established from Series 1. So of course Rose, the opening episode, had a crucial role to play in re-establishing the show, making it accessible for a brand new audience, a brand new generation of children to be able to watch that first episode and really enjoy Doctor Who, be able to understand it straight off and be able to get into it and sort of connect and engage and therefore be able to continue through the series and keep watching it. And I think that is what Russell absolutely nailed in episode 1. Because no, it's not the greatest episode of Doctor Who ever, but it is the perfect episode to start the show off again with, because it doesn't follow the mistakes of the Doctor Who TV movie where they try to cram every possible bit of mythology into one special, giving every single piece of information about the Doctor, regeneration, Gallifrey, the Master, everything they tried to throw in straight into one thing, and it was just too much and it didn't work. Whereas Russell realised that the way to do it is to gradually introduce different aspects and elements of the Doctor and of Doctor Who and of the Time Lords and Gallifrey and everything like that, and to build up to it rather than try and chuck it all in one go. And so initially the Doctor is just established as this kind of mysterious figure who turns up in moments of sort of danger and trouble and saves the day. And we just gradually, through this episode and through the whole series, start to learn a little bit more about him and about his past and everything like that. I think it was definitely the right decision to go with a new Doctor and just to start straight away in the middle of sort of a new Doctor. I mean, certainly the implication is that we're very much early on in the 9th Doctor sort of run when he's looking at his ears and kind of sort of looking in the mirror like he hasn't seen himself before, suggests that this is very early in his timeline. As the Doctor, of course, ultimately I don't think it's that long a timeline. I think you would say, of course, there's gaps, but ultimately it's not sort of as long as some of the other Doctors, I think it's fair to say. But it definitely was the right decision to not faff around with trying to bring in McGann and have him regenerate into Eccleston. As much as people love McGann, I really like McGann as the Doctor, and I would have liked, I always want to see more of him, and Nice of the Doctor was brilliant for that. But I think for the purpose of the sort of starting off the series again, it was critical to just establish this new Doctor, the new character, to not have all the baggage of bringing in, who's this guy called Paul McGann who used to be some dude, and why is his face suddenly changed into somebody else? Like, it would have been too confusing to try and cram that into Rose, I think, personally. And I think that's another thing where the TV movie didn't work, by bringing in a older Sylvester McCoy and getting him to be shot at and regenerated into Paul McGann in the special. Just, again, didn't really sort of do what it needed. It was too much to put into that one story, I think. So that's where Rose just did all of these aspects so much better. Instantly, Rose gives us a very much a sort of showing of what this era of Doctor Who is going to be like. It's very much more about the companions. It's much more family driven. It's all not quite a soap. I don't want to say it's a soap, but it's going more that way where we instantly establish Rose, establish she's got a boyfriend, she's got a mum, and there's all that sort of just establishing that family straight off in episode 1, whereas in most of Classic Who, I don't think we really meet any sort of family members of companions or anything like that. There's very, very, very little of that in the classic series. And straight away, episode 1, boom, the first character we see on screen pretty much is Rose. And the Doctor turns up to say the day a little briefly, and then he's gone again for a few more minutes, and then we see Rose's mum, we see Mickey, and we just establish a sort of setting, a family, a situation that Rose is going to be scooped out of, rather than some of the more just a companion ends up, oh, it's a female in a story that just gets whisked away sort of in the classic series. It's much more kind of grounded to that, and obviously then has the consequences through the series of dealing with those family and the relationships between them, and that's it's sort of, yeah, I think Rose, episode 1 of the series, really much is sort of the RTD era summed up to a degree. It very much is setting out everything that they want to do with the show. I think it was a great idea to bring back the Autons as well. They're a fairly, I don't want to say a generic villain, but they have a fairly, there's very much only one story to tell with them really, is that a sort of attempted Earth invasion, combining them with the Nestine consciousness and everything like that, which of course looks dated now, there's no denying that, but at the time it would have looked, I think, pretty spectacular compared to the sort of 80s special effects and the Classic Who special effects. It would have looked fantastic, and it just, I think every aspect of this episode worked for the purpose it needed. It established it as it made it feel up to date and current and 21st century by having it all set in present day Earth, London and everything like that. It was obviously a lot more fast paced than what we were used to in Classic Who. There's much more sort of orchestral score to it as well, with Murray Gold coming in, and it just, I think, very much was creating it to be 2005 television. It wasn't sort of, they weren't trying to make it like it was in the 80s. They were trying to make it its own thing, but still completely Doctor Who as well, which I think is just such a brilliant job that Russell did to re-establish the show. And there really was critical acclaim straight from the off, straight from the end of Rose. People were sort of raving about the show. I'm sure a fair amount of people who were very much classic Doctor Who fans might have been, I didn't experience it, I didn't really know about it at the time, but people who would have been a little bit sort of unsure, because this version of the show is so different to the classic series. It didn't click for some fans, took some time for some fans, and some people just have never enjoyed New Who anywhere near as much as the classic series, and that's absolutely fine. But I think it did, Doctor Who couldn't be remade like it was in the classic series in 2005, it just wouldn't have worked. So then we sort of tackle, the next few episodes tackle a kind of formula that Russell used in several of his series by having an episode 1, or in the first 3 episodes, they just have one episode set at the present, one in the past, one in the future. And that was a sort of, I think, a structure he used in Series 1, Series 2, Series 3, and Series 4, I think. He used it in sort of all 4 of his series. It was that kind of, at the beginning of the series, we're going to cover off all the bases that Doctor Who can do in those first few episodes to really kind of engage all the different audience that like different sorts of things. We're going to give them all those different aspects straight away to hopefully hook people in. I think that's a really, really good idea. It works effectively in Series 1 as well. End of the World is I think, a better story than some people give it credit for. There's no denying that Series 1 is a nostalgia fest, and that anybody who watched it at the time and was a kid like me at the time, like, you cannot help but be extremely nostalgic to this series. It's just sort of, it feels like my childhood, even more than the David Tennant era to a degree, I think. And so it's just, I've seen those episodes so many times in the last 14 years that you almost know it word for word in some scenes. It's kind of, you can't separate the nostalgia from the show. So I think I'm, no matter what, going to be positively biased to Series 1. Yeah, just because it was my childhood series in that regard. But I think that, yeah, The End of the World is sort of setting out straight away what Doctor Who could do in 2005 that they couldn't do in the classic series, in terms of having just so many aliens and different sort of creatures in that one single episode, very much showing what it would be like in the future, that there'll be so many different races clashing with each other and kind of working together and being just all sort of mingling to watch the end of the world and things like that is a great idea, is something that they just wouldn't have had the budget for in the classic series. So I thought that was a really kind of good episode for showing what Doctor Who could do with a bit more money and in 2005, and therefore works very effectively for that reason. And then in the following episode, going way back in time to the sort of Charles Dickens era, having almost what some people call the Ninth Doctor's Christmas special, because it was set around Christmas even if it wasn't aired on Christmas Day. And that's an episode that I've never been quite as much of a fan of. I mean, Mark Gatiss, generally his episodes don't really do anything for me. Historical stuff and ghost-related stories have never been my cup of tea either, quite so much. So I certainly don't think it's a bad story. It's probably one of Mark's better efforts, but it's definitely not one of my sort of favourite stories of the series. Following that, we have what I always think is quite an underrated two-parter, Aliens of London / World War III, the Slitheen two-parter, introducing the Slitheen as a monster in Doctor Who, which we only ever really see in Series 1. They're never really, they shifted the Sarah Jane Adventures really after Series 1, because to a degree, they are, I don't want to say a kid's monster, but they are a monster that very much was aimed at children, it's clear to see, with the farting aspect to them. And it just kind of, I thought they were a good villain in this particular story. I think this story has a lot more going for it than some people like to say. It very much establishes Doctor Who as a 2005 show, a present day show. You've got BBC News reports from people sort of reporting on aliens invading the Earth and things like that, and like, that's not something we ever saw anything of in the classic series. So I think it's very much sort of, again, just bringing Doctor Who up to date and making it very much about the world who finally is learning about aliens for the first time, and the world is realising that aliens are real and everything like that. And it's just that kind of first development of what we see throughout Russell's era of the Earth does know about aliens, the aliens are a threat. Because of course, you look at the 1970s, the Unit era, like, blooming every week there's another alien invasion of the Earth, but nobody ever notices it. It just kind of happens, Unit fights it off, and then it's all gone, which is fine. I love that era for that, and that's just the way it was back then. But I think it's great that Russell's kind of given it this scale by just as I say, simple things like having a BBC News report, having a load of sort of family members watching it on the TV happening. Like, that's what we would do nowadays, or certainly in 2005, and I think onwards. That's the sort of thing we would do if there was an alien invasion or something. We'd sit and watch it on TV. Or if there's possibility of that. And so I thought that was just a kind of really accurate portrayal of, yeah, what would it be like in bringing Doctor Who up to the 21st century once again. Dalek is of course an all-time classic. There's no denying that it's just a phenomenal episode. It's such a shame that Robert Shearman has never written another episode since then for the TV series, because his one effort is amazing. It is the perfect way to introduce the Daleks back to the show. Sort of just that one, all you need is one single Dalek. It's showing how much of a threat it is straight away, that you don't need a whole fleet of them to kill everybody. One Dalek could kill the whole of the Earth, destroy the whole Earth. Like, that's how dangerous and deadly they are. And just reintroducing that into the show in sort of that gradual aspect, showing that they can now get upstairs and everything like that, and just yeah, gradually sort of slowly introducing them to the show and setting things up for the finale as well. It's just such a clever idea, and it's just such a perfect story, with the Doctor filled with rage from the Time War and having sort of lost his race to the Daleks essentially, and having to kind of face that off, and Rose very much the one having to try and help the Doctor kind of stop him from doing these terrible things, because he shouldn't be doing this even to a Dalek, but he sort of can't help himself when he's so filled with rage. And so there's just so many layers to that story. I think it is definitely one of the highlights of Series 1. The Long Game is one of those episodes, episode 7, the sort of mid-series episodes that aren't quite so good. I think what is really good about this story is it ultimately sets up the finale absolutely fantastically. It's like, you wouldn't have predicted at the time that it'd have any effect. It seems like the Doctor saved the day, that he sort of stopped the Jagrafest controlling everything, controlling what happens in this space station and everything, and instead it actually turns out that that's where everything went downhill, and that it all became even more controlled and everything, and Doctor actually caused all the problems rather than saving the day in the grand scheme of things. And like, you would never guess that at the time, and it's just so perfectly establishing Satellite 5 as a sort of main base for what most of the finale is ultimately played out on, and where the Daleks are going to invade from and everything. And it's just, so yeah, so more for what it ultimately does with the series, I think, than an episode itself is what it's really good at. It's not a bad episode. I wouldn't say it's one of the worst episodes, but it probably is the weakest link of Series 1. Following that, we have Father's Day, which is another stunning story, such an emotive story, something that we would never really see much of in Classic Who, but such an obvious idea to tackle of Rose or a companion wanting to go back and change history to save someone that they loved and things like that. And it's like, it's just such a perfect idea for Doctor Who to tackle. The Reapers are a sort of interesting villain that they're sort of sucking out, kind of, they're feeding off cracks in time and everything like that, and the sort of broken time, and then the Doctor disappearing because he gets caught by a Reaper, the TARDIS becoming empty and everything like that, and the problems that can be caused by changing history is just so brilliant, and so brilliantly portrayed and so emotive, and really just again hammering home the sort of focus more on relationships between characters and developing that family around Rose, and that Rose has been whisked away by the Doctor, but that she's still got all this sort of family history and everything that's focused on so heavily in this particular episode. So it's just another one of those fantastic stories that really kind of sets the stall for future episodes in Doctor Who, where we kind of tackle sort of companions wanting to go back to see their loved ones in the past and things like that. So it's really, really brilliant episode. And following that, we have the fantastic two-parter, Stephen Moffat's first ever story for the main series of Doctor Who, The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances. The sort of terrifying gas mask zombies of this episode, probably still one of the most terrifying villains or sort of just alien things in Doctor Who. Seeing that old sort of Doctor, his face kind of turning into the gas mark, kind of growing, his eyes growing over it. The CGI really for 2005 looks pretty damn good and is absolutely terrifying to watch. I think for me at the time it was pretty terrifying, and even now I still think it is probably one of the most terrifying, as a sort of appearances of an alien in Doctor Who. And just the so sort of creepy voices of "Are You My Mummy" that's become so iconic and synonymous with Doctor Who really now, I think, and was just absolutely that super scary episode of the series, but such an effective plot. And having watched it more recently, it also reminded me how straight away this is so Stephen Moffat, this story. Like just the dialogue, the way it's written, everything about it just screams Stephen Moffat. Like there's so many lines that you hear Chris's Doctor say that you're almost not used to him saying things like that, because it's just Stephen Moffat dialogue as opposed to Russell's dialogue that we hear obviously Chris doing most of. And so it does feel quite different in that regard, and much more feels like what we get later in New Who when Stephen takes over properly. But is just a fantastically put together episode as well. Then an episode that could be filler, and is probably one of these sort of lower budget episodes, a bit of cost saving, bringing back a Slitheen for Boomtown, which is much more of a kind of character based, I guess less bombastic explosion story. Of course the ending with the rift opening up in Cardiff and everything like that, there's a bit more sort of going on there. But it is a much more kind of toned down story to a degree before the big sort of massive finale. But I think it's a very, very kind of cleverly set up story, again harking back to the Slitheen two-parter from earlier in the series, where the one Slitheen, Margaret, survives, and that she wants to get her revenge on the Doctor and try and be able to travel sort of back in time and take control of time and everything and like that, and becoming all powerful. And it's just sort of another tying in the whole series together. This series is such a brilliantly kind of self-contained series to a large degree, in terms of everything is kind of interconnected, because I think to a large degree Russell didn't know whether he was going to be able to have another series. He thought this could be it, as good, that this might be his only shot to do Doctor Who, so he wants to make it absolutely as brilliantly as he can, and also relatively self-contained, so that if it is only a one-off, fans can still enjoy it as a one-off and not kind of be desperate to find out what was going to happen. Not end the series on a massive cliffhanger. Yes, there's a new Doctor, but you didn't have to have that massive cliffhanger element of leaving plot threads open and everything like that. So I think that was a very, very clever idea, and Boomtown's another opportunity to tie that all together. And then we get the absolutely brilliant Series 1 finale, still for me probably one of the best finales of Doctor Who that we've seen since then. It's just, again, so perfectly interwoven, as I said, into the series with the long game previously, and setting up the Satellite 5 and everything like that. To a degree, in Bad Wolf, the first part, the game show things make it a bit dated and a bit 2005, but there's definitely nostalgia making it still enjoyable. I still remember The Weakest Link, I still remember Big Brother's still going and things like that. Like, yes, to a degree it's dated, but I don't think it's to a massive detriment to the story. It can still be a fantastically enjoyable story throughout. Introducing the Daleks back, the whole fleet of Daleks is a threat, which genuinely seems like a surprise. I think apart from putting a Dalek at the end of the trailer, for some reason at the end of the Boomtown Next Time trailer there's a Dalek in there, which just seems a bit stupid really. But they did that, and showing them all again in all their glory is just absolutely fantastic. Having the Dalek Emperor back for the first time since 1967, and Eve of the Daleks is just amazing. And them sort of having to be defeated by Rose, who sort of absorbs all the hearts of the time vortex, again linking that back into Boomtown, where you're putting the idea of the sort of absorbing the time vortex and everything. It's just, that's, as I say, it's just so brilliantly interconnected. Every story is linked to one another. There's so many plot threads that all tie up into different episodes. It's just such a fantastically interwoven series that I don't think has ever been topped in that regard, of just everything so interconnected. Having Bad Wolf, of course, running through the series as well. Yes, it's very much just two words that kind of pop up on a wall or on the side of the TARDIS and stuff like that through the series, rather than being too heavy an arc. But it still, again, ties everything together at the end of the series, and Rose realising that she's going to become the Bad Wolf and control time, and that the Doctor is going to have to save Rose, but he's going to have to sacrifice himself for it. It's all just so cleverly written and put together. It's brilliant. And of course, ending the series with Christopher Eccleston regenerating as well is just kind of tops it off. As much as, yes, I think I'm probably agree with basically everybody that we want to see more of Christopher Eccleston, and that it's a crime that we never got to see more than one series. But I completely understand why he wanted to do it that way, that he only committed to doing a single series, and that to a large degree, that probably was a good idea, to just have him as the re-establishing the show Doctor before a new actor can take it off and really sort of push it into massive mainstream success that David Tennant did. And maybe that would have been different if Chris had stayed on for another series. I don't think we'll ever know, well, we won't ever know quite what difference that would have made if he'd done a second or a third series. But I think it just is so perfectly set up and weaved through this series in terms of him being a one-series Doctor. I think it very much, he has such a brilliant character arc from beginning to end, where he sort of starts the series very angry at what happened in the Time War, and it just takes Rose to gradually kind of calm him down, and getting to that point at the end of The Parting of the Ways where he's got the opportunity to kill all the Daleks and all the humans. And in the Time War, the War Doctor would have done that, but this Doctor, because he's been helped along by Rose, realises that actually he can't do that he is a coward, that he wouldn't actually do that and kill everybody and kill all these innocent people off, and that he'd prefer to sort of die really than have to do that again. And I think that just shows the fantastic element of the character development and just everything tying together so perfectly throughout this series. So yes, it's one of those series that is so, as I say, brilliantly interconnected. It's one of those series that is going to always be nostalgic, and so I think will always be, to a degree, more highly regarded than it could be from somebody watching it sort of for the first time. For any of us who've watched it when it aired, or fairly recently after it aired, that it will always be nostalgic. But I think there's no denying that Chris Eccleston was a fantastic Doctor, and that we will always want to see more of him than we ever got. That Russell wrote some brilliant stories in this first series, that it did exactly what it needed to re-establish the programme. It sort of dump all the information in episode 1 and make it too much to handle, and it just alienating everybody. It made it more grounded. He made them show more about the relationships between the sort of characters, and introducing Rose as a much more 21st century companion who's more involved in the story. She's not just there to stand around and scream at the monsters. She's going to be part of saving the day, which I think is such a big change. Yes, there was a little bit of that with Ace towards the end of the classic series, but this is where it's really properly re-established, and I think that just helped to sort of gain a more mainstream audience, making the show, to a degree, less heavy sci-fi and more kind of drama with a bit of aliens, I think is probably the best way to put it. And that's why it's attracted such a big mainstream audience and just sort of catapulted the show back into mainstream global sort of fandom really. And that is so brilliant for the show. Otherwise, I think if series 1 had failed, I wouldn't be here talking about Doctor Who now. It would have been a show that lasted 1-2 more series in 2005, 2006, then died out. I would have enjoyed it at the time and forgotten about it since then. But it's to Russell T Davies' credit, to Chris's credit, to Billy's credit, that they all came together to produce a brilliant show, brilliant series which has just created this amazing show that's still going today. And I think to a degree what's even more impressive is how successful that series was, given that the problems behind the scenes, particularly in that first filming block, Aliens of London and World War III, those first 2 episodes they filmed, just sounds like I know no one's ever really willing to tell too much about what happened behind the scenes, but there's no denying that it was not good, and that clearly Chris and Russell and Julie and everybody didn't get on particularly fantastically, and so there were definitely problems behind the scenes, and pretty significant problems early on, I think. And so the fact that they managed to kind of put that aside, at least on screen, and for it to still come out so fantastically is just a testament to kind of, it's pretty crazy that it actually worked out, given that it sounds like they all basically hated each other, hated working on it, and yet it's one of the best series of Doctor Who. Like, it's mad that that's even possible. So I guess you've got to give them credit, even if they weren't all working together very, very well, that the people involved did somehow manage to knock some heads together and get it all working, create a brilliant, brilliant series, because that's what it is. It's a brilliant series. So yes, I could talk about Series 1 for hours. I could sit down and work my way through every single episode, and I'm sure in the future, at some point, I will review all the Series 1 episodes and go through New Who and something like that, like I'm doing with Classic Who at the moment. Once I reach that point in the new series, I'm sure I'll start reviewing the episodes properly, and I can't wait to do that because there's so much fantastic stuff to look more in-depth into. But just as I've got a general overall retrospective of the series, Doctor Who Series 1 is still one of the best series, probably in my top 3, top 4 series of Doctor Who of all time, even including the classic seasons as well. I think it did exactly what it needed to do to start a new era of Doctor Who and engage a new generation of fans of the series. It's so cleverly interconnected. It does a brilliant job of establishing the Doctor and establishing a new companion, a new format for the show as well, I think, as well. That as I say, it all just combines to make almost the perfect series. But what about you guys? What do you think of Series 1? Do you have the same sort of nostalgia as I do for it? Do you agree with me that it's one of the greatest series, or are you a little bit less sort of excited by that as a series and you can see more of the problems and it just isn't quite your cup of tea in terms of Doctor Who, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about Series 1 of Doctor Who. But other than that, that's just about it from this video, guys. I will be coming back with the retrospectives for Series 2, 3, 4 and the specials of Doctor Who in the sort of coming months. I'm not going to say it's going to be too consistent, it might be every 2, 3, 4 weeks. A little bit unpredictable, but I definitely am going to do those certainly this year, no doubt, but hopefully sooner rather than later as well. So I hope you guys are going to be looking forward to those videos as well. But other than that, guys, do remember to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, remember to follow me on Twitter at EMS_Productions for all my updates on new upcoming videos, thoughts on Doctor Who, the sort of show, what's going on with it at the moment, any filming updates and things like that. Do remember to check me out on there, but other than that, I'll see you again very soon in another video. Goodbye!